Hello, and thank you so much for signing up for our online hybrid wilderness first aid course. On behalf of all of us at Center for Wilderness Safety, we hope that you enjoy the class, learn a great deal about wilderness medicine, and gain the knowledge and skills necessary to help those who become injured or sick while playing in the great outdoors. Your instructors will be here the whole time and are always happy to answer any questions that you may have, give you pointers, and even show you tips and tricks along the way. Don't forget, you can also reach out to us at any time through our student Facebook group, WhatsApp, by email, and via live chat on our website. Once you complete the online portion of class with a cumulative passing score of 80% or better, you'll then be allowed to attend an in-person, hands-on training session, which you'll also need to pass in order to successfully earn your wilderness first aid certification.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. Hey, everybody. My name's Cliff. I'm going to be your game show host for the duration of this wonderful online hybrid course. I'm sure you read a little bit about me, but in case you didn't, I have been in pre-hospital care for the better part of 2 decades in both wilderness and urban situations, search and rescue teams, and most importantly, I used to teach 5th grade, which is surprisingly relevant because a lot of my 5th grade antics come through in teaching. So, yes, and by the way, this is going to be a very laid-back, kind of natural course. I can't stand when people just sit there and then drone on about PowerPoint because, well, we all know how that goes. All right, let's get started, shall we? Let's talk about our basic core concepts, the things you need to know before we get into the meat of wilderness first aid, including some very important concepts such as real versus ideal, how to go slow to go fast, and of course, my favorite thing, MacGyvering. All right, let's start with the basic here. Let me start with asking you a question. What is wilderness medicine? Well, before we can answer that, what is wilderness? Wilderness, when I think of the word wilderness, it pops into my mind, Denali, some, vast tundra, mountains, lakes, no one for miles and miles, and that's great and all, but wilderness doesn't necessarily need to be these crazy remote places. What wilderness medicine happens to be is when you are in a situation where you need medical care for someone who's injured or ill, and the place that you are is very simply put at least 60 minutes away from definitive care. Now, definitive care means something, we're talking brick or mortar, a hospital, clinic, that kind of thing. We're not talking about, ambulance or helicopter or something of that nature, because those are not definitive, right? Definitive means end result. Trust me when I tell you, you don't want to end up on the ambulance, right? You want to go where the ambulance is taking you, or so I'm told. So that is the thing. And this whole 60 minutes away from definitive care doesn't necessarily mean, like I said, Denali or whatnot. It can be almost anywhere. So I live around the Washington, D.C. area here, and we have some trails and all sorts of, the C&O Canal park. Then there's all sorts of great national parks around here, which are, within spitting distance of the nation's capital. And if something were to go wrong on these trails, there are access gates. And for example, the fire rescue, they're not going to come busting down the gate just, oh, Jimmy broke his arm again, whatever, they're going to wait for someone with the key. And by the time they actually get to you. And so my point is that this whole concept of wilderness doesn't necessarily need to be these crazy remote areas. It can be anywhere where help is delayed. So with that in mind, let's jump into thinking about what are some of the other differences that kind of distinguish wilderness medicine from urban, right? Urban medicine, we have all of our resources, everything's here, time is not really a factor so much. If we need medicine, we can get it pretty readily. If weather is terrible, we can just go inside. There might be some circumstances where, power went out or something, but we're still protected. In a wilderness setting, we don't really have any of these, and that's kind of not cool, right? So we're going to jump into how this really affects how we manage patients in a wilderness setting. But before we get there, let's take a half a step back, actually many, many years back, and talk about where did wilderness medicine come from. Now, in 1811, Napoleon Surgeon was one of the first people credited to really establish a organized version of what we now call wilderness medicine. Essentially, on the battlefield, all the soldiers were having issues with, hypothermia, obviously wounds and such from battle, but things that were not necessarily related to, being shot at or whatnot, but things like dehydration were a huge concern. So they were trying to figure out how to manage these specific things in a situation where they didn't have their hospitals or clinics even back in the day. Now, obviously, one could argue that wilderness medicine has been around forever because medicine was not really that great way before that. Yeah, well, we've since progressed to hospitals and clinics, and medicine as a whole has taken leaps and bounds to where we have those resources and facilities nowadays. So let's jump ahead, right? That was our first thing, which, by the way, one quick side note, a lot of wilderness medicine does, in fact, come from the battlefield, right? The Department of Defense and Armed Forces, they tend to see what's going on, and they tend to deal with all sorts of issues all across the globe, and they don't have the facilities as well. So a lot of these things were, time is a factor, and because they're, not readily available, that's where a lot of wilderness medicine comes from. Okay, I digress. Back to this. So we're at 1905. The American Red Cross starts working on their first public courses of first aid and CPR, which are a gangbuster, right? Everyone loves them. They're great. And of course, then not a whole lot happens until 1966. And that's an interesting year because that is when, of all organizations ever, the Department of Transportation, you heard that right, not Department of Health, but instead the Department of Transportation creates this thing called the Golden Hour. Now, the Golden Hour, if you don't know, is basically a rule that says, listen, if someone is injured or ill, bad enough that they need to go to the hospital or to the doctor's office, right? Between the time that the injury or illness occurs and the time that they're at the hospital, that should be no more than 60 minutes, right? So because we play in the wilderness, obviously we are outside of that golden hour automatically, and we play in the golden day, right? So our goal as wilderness first aiders is going to be to get people to definitive care within at least 24 hours, preferably less, depending on how severe things are. We'll get into that. But that's what we play with, right? In 1977, the first wilderness EMT course was developed by University of Virginia, or a program thereof. And right after that, they realized, maybe something a little bit less hardcore might be a good idea. And that was when the first wilderness first aid course, or mountain first aid as it was called, was developed. And that was kind of a big deal because that's what we're stemming from right now. Now, a lot has changed since 1978, believe you me. However, the basics are still there, right? The basics being what separates wilderness from urban. So wilderness context, greater range of wilderness things that we can do. Because of where we are and the situations we find ourselves in, we may not necessarily have the time, the resources, and whatever, but we still need the end result, right? So we have these things called protocols, which essentially allow us to do these things that would otherwise, in an urban situation, be, not only frowned upon, but potentially illegal, right? So if we're working under the auspices of an organization, like perhaps some of you are, scouts, the Scouts BSA has adopted our protocols, and they say, yep, okay, that's cool. As long as you're, more than 60 minutes away from definitive care, you can go ahead and do these things. Other organizations like Sierra Club, many outdoor organizations like Canoe and Kayak, and even in summer camps and remote things of that nature also do them as well. So protocols we'll get into here in a bit. The variety of injuries are going to be different for sure, but the injuries themselves are going to be treated the same, right? I mean, a puncture is a puncture is a puncture, whether the puncture is from rebar on the construction site, whether it's from a jib on a sailboat, whether it's a bear claw. I mean, not the ones from the bakery, obviously, those are way more dangerous. We're going to treat them all the same way. It doesn't really matter where they took place, right? Both patient and rescuer are going to be at risk. Environmental extremes, I think that's pretty much common sense there. Lack of stuff, yep, that's an issue. And of course, simple things become life-threatening, and that is where things change slightly, and they get a little bit more dicey, obviously because of where we are. The biggest thing in there, and I honestly think that this should have been red. By the way, if you haven't noticed, things that are red tend to be kind of important, like protocols, right? We'll get there. Patient care and contact time basically is the defining characteristic, right? It's that time. Time is always working against us, and obviously we're in the golden day. But listen, now you get to be 911. because 911's not coming in time to save a person's life. So all of the things that people take for granted are now on your shoulders, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. So before we get there, there is a concept, as I mentioned before, which we talked about, what I mentioned is called real versus ideal. And this is a photo from a wilderness first responder course. That's the 80-hour course that hopefully one of you or some of you will take one day. And honestly, you learn things in a straight, manner. There's lists, there's following, there's diagrams and lists and a checklist, and there's the textbook, and it's great. But then you walk outside and you see this, right? And your first thought is, are you freaking kidding me? At least that's what I would think, right? I mean, I got questions. Like, what was she doing? I think she was like climbing a tree, and then maybe the tree broke and then she fell, and now she's like 4 or 5 feet up off the ground on a branch. Is she conscious? I don't know. Is she bleeding? I see some blood there. Is she breathing? I don't know. Does she have a head, neck, spine injury? How do I get her down? What do I do first? Well, the honest truth is, you're going to go slow to go fast. Okay. That doesn't make sense, right? Let me paraphrase, shall I? Don't just do something, stand there. Wait, what? Yeah, because here's the thing. If you're trying to get this lady out of the tree and you kind of get it right, but then you also do this other thing over here and it kind of goes a little bit wrong on this side. Okay, well, we get that right. That created a problem over there. Now we got to rethink it. Let's try this over here. Okay. So you're doing things and you're kind of making it work, but you're kind of not. You're making things worse and making things work. Dude, stop. Stop, think, observe, plan, aka brainstorm, right? Work smart, not hard. And the easiest way to kind of get your mind around that is one of the other biggest things that differentiates the wilderness medicine from urban, which is MacGyvering, right? How do you do something, but in a different way using what you have? So if you're not familiar with who MacGyver is, this dashing young gentleman here, Mr. Angus MacGyver, it's a TV show, right, from the 80s. And it's a former army bomb tech who essentially is anti-gun, and he finds himself in these horrible situations. He has to save the world, and he has always nothing but his pocket knife, a paperclip, and some duct tape, right? And good luck. Go ahead and dismantle the bomb and save mankind as we know it with those 3 things. And so that right there is honestly how we're going to figure this out, right? Getting her out of that tree, we have to think, observe, plan. So get out of your mind, right? And step outside of that box that you're used to. Start thinking about how you can use things in other ways. So your sleeping pad can now become a backboard. Your clothing can be a sling, raincoat, bandage, etc., etc. I would love to know how, indeed, MacGyver is going to make a grenade out of a cat and a paperclip, but I digress. Okay, so like I said, this is one of the biggest concepts that we have in wilderness medicine, and it's a mindset, right? So let's put your noggin to the test. And so here's a backpack, right? We all have these for the most part. If not, you've definitely seen one. This is an internal frame pack, so there are frames, and they are probably metal staves that go along the inside there to give it some rigidity. Just by looking at this, my question to you is, how else can you use this backpack besides its intended purpose, obviously for, carrying stuff? So there's lots of things I see. I see webbing. I see some nylon material there. I don't know if it's waterproof or not. I think the tops are usually waterproof, so let's pretend the top is waterproof. We have some bungee cords. We have some padding, some foam padding there. We have some buckles. We have, what else do we have? We have some netting, right? There's all sorts of different things I can kind of think of. Obviously, the straps would be great for cordage, for tying things, as are the bungee cords as well. I imagine we could use that in part to make a tourniquet. We could take off the top and we could use it as a water container potentially. We have material there that is probably flammable, so we can use it for either A, to burn for fire starters, or B, we could use it for signaling. We have, let's see here. We have a little bit of mesh. We could use that, possibly do a little makeshift fishing, perhaps. We have the metal staves that go inside and make the frame. We can take those out. Perhaps we can sharpen them. We can use them as a makeshift weapon if need be, or to help us fish, like a little spear or something of that nature. The nylon material itself could possibly be either a bandage or an occlusive, or a dressing, right? And by the way, if you don't know the difference between a bandage and a dressing, it's very, very simple to remember. Dressing goes directly on salad, and therefore dressing goes on the wound, right? And bandages hold the dressing is in place. So like bandages are the croutons, if you will. Okay. So in any event, we could do either or. I could go on and on and on, right? I mean, and here's just a couple of things that we talked about. As far as signaling goes, we have burning it. We talked about that. Signaling flags, if it's a nice bright color, perhaps something that stands out, that'd be pretty awesome. Toilet paper, there you go. Never underestimate the power of good toilet paper in the woods. Just saying. We have a lot of different things that we can use this pack for, and that right there is the essence of getting outside that box. Start problem solving, improvise, adapt, and overcome, if you will, depending on your background. Who are you going to call? Right? Who's your go-to person for MacGyvering? Assuming that MacGyver's not on speed dial. The person that you should be looking to for the most creative and possibly best ideas ever are kids. Because here's the thing. The younger they are, the smarter than you they are, right? We all know that's true. It may be annoying, but it's true. I asked my 5-year-old the other day, I said, hey, come up with a solution for this problem I have. And after fighting me, which of course is something that kids do, he came up with the most ridiculous, convoluted, wow, that actually works. And that's actually better than what I came up. Wow, I'm impressed. So the point is, just because they're a kid, don't write them off. Extended patient contact time is, again, our biggest enemy. And there are things that we have to deal with for those patients. Not only personal hygiene, right? Going to the bathroom and such is now going to be a huge issue, potentially, depending on what injury or how bad they are. If their stomach is so cramped up they can't even move, hey man, you got to do what you got to do. Hydration and nutrition is definitely important. Thermoregulations, got to stay warm. And you'd be surprised how quickly one becomes cold when you're just sitting there, even if you're not injured or sick. Physical comfort, always a good thing. Psychological reassurance, right? That trailside manner, as it were. Humor and entertainment. The best medicine is, in fact, humor. Unless, of course, it's not. And last but not least, spiritual comfort. So we have all of these different aspects of patient care that we have to deal with now that we don't normally have to because they're normally, self-sufficient. Oh, right. And on top of that, we have someone who's actually injured or ill. Great. So it's a lot to shoulder. There are a couple of things that we do need to know as far as what we're really going to be concerned with, right? Talking about these injuries and illnesses. And those, my friends, are called LTCs, which is an MLA. Sorry about that. MLA is multi-letter acronym, right? You're going to have a lot of those. By the way, there's a lovely vocab sheet in your course materials. You can download that and use that as a wonderful cheat sheet for you. A lot of the most common ones are going to be there. LTC being one of them, right? Life-threatening condition, things that if we do not correct them immediately, well, they just don't end well, right? Death might be imminent depending on how severe these things are. So we have, let's see, the big ones here. Cardiac emergencies, could be chest pain. What does chest pain mean? Well, it could be a heart attack, could be Taco Bell. You never know. Never say never, right? Just saying. Cardiac arrest, that's way worse. Obviously, you're dead. Breathing emergencies, choking, asthma, severe bleeding, unresponsive, and ALOR. So really quick on that. Unresponsive is the same thing more or less as unconscious, but we use the level of responsiveness scale, not the level of consciousness scale. They're very similar, but the only issue is either you're conscious or you're unconscious. It's like a yes or no kind of thing, right? As opposed to your level of responsiveness. Ooh, your levels. Cool. So unresponsive is bad, aka you're out like a light bulb, right? ALOR stands for altered level of responsiveness, We'll talk more about that here in a bit. Diabetic emergencies very well might be life-threatening. Thermal extremes, obviously, hypo and hyperthermia, aka hypothermia, we know you're obviously frozen. Hyperthermia, aka heat stroke, not to be confused with actual stroke, which is the next one there. Poisoning very well might be. Maybe someone ate some berries or something, or just had some bad food. You never know. Maybe they went out and took some medication. Who knows? As a side note, though, the toll-free number for poison control is, in fact, 1-800-222-1222. That's a great number to call. They will give you tons and tons of information about any kind of thing that people have been either ingested or have eaten or have been stung with, or you never know. But it's just that. It's information. They don't actually send help. So if you have an actual emergency, I recommend dialing 911. And, of course, they'll patch you through to these guys right here. Seizures, for the most part, are actually not life-threatening, but we don't know what's causing it, right? There might be something underlying, and of course, if someone's never had a seizure before, that could definitely indicate something serious. So we'll throw it up there on the life-threatening conditions list just for good measure. We have shock. Now, there's lots of different kinds of shock, and I'm sure that you've heard of, shock kills, and people are always worried about shock. Well, yes, sort of, I guess. There's multiple different kinds of shock, which you're going to learn about later in this course. Hypovolemic sounds horrible, and it is. Yep, that's serious. Anaphylactic shock, you might have heard of that one, right? That's the EpiPen allergy one. Yep, we'll talk more about that as well. Head, brain, spine injuries, severe burns to the hands, feet, face, and groin because you use them on a daily basis. So gnarly burns to those. These are all life-threatening conditions, all important stuff to know. Hopefully, you are feeling better than this guy's about to. Moral of the story, don't kiss snakes. Ever. Pretty sure that's what the slide is all about. Oh yeah, always expect the unexpected, prepare for the worst. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition! So I am told, at least. I don't know. But I will tell you there are some things that we can, in fact, expect. Besides the unexpected. For example, acronyms. That's right, MLAs. Those wonderful thingies. I know I said that there are a lot of these, and I wasn't lying, sorry to say, but at least we've given you a couple of wonderful resources in your course downloads. Amongst them is a wonderful, quite thorough list of acronyms and mnemonics and a bunch of other medical jargon that you'll probably never use, but that's beside the point. So let's get started with some of the ones that you actually, will use. Probably a lot, actually. So, number 1. A, B, C, D, E. Congratulations, you've passed the 5th grade. You should know these. In fact, you've probably passed the 1st grade, but that's neither here nor there. A, B, C, D, E stand for airway, breathing, circulation, disability, and exposure. Those, of course, being the first 5 components of the initial patient assessment. AVPU and ALOR, besides being really fun to say, AVPU is actually this scale that we use to assess a person's level of responsiveness. It stands for alert, verbal, pain, and unresponsive. And ALOR means altered level of responsiveness. So someone who's kind of cattywampus, I believe that's a medical term, someone who's out of it, right? Now, ALOR is very similar to ALOC, A-L-O-C, or L-O-C, being level of consciousness. And a lot of folks use that as opposed to level of responsiveness. We prefer level of responsiveness just because, think about it, you're either conscious or you're unconscious. That's 2 options, right? Level of responsiveness gives us so much more to play with. So if nothing else, there you have it. CSM stands for circulation, sensation, and movement. That is something that we're going to use when it comes to our orthopedic injury practice. And DOTS, deformities, open wounds, tenderness, and swelling. All things that we are looking for, hopefully not going to find when it comes to an orthopedic injury yet again. Continuing right along, we have LTCs, which we already know. So life-threatening conditions, right? That's already up there. And we also have SAMPLE. That's our new one here. SAMPLE stands for signs and symptoms, allergies, medications, past pertinent medical history, last ins and outs, and events leading up to the injury or illness. That is something that's going to be really, really handy in a little bit here when we start getting into our assessment of our patient. Last but not least, we have 2 more here. We have SOAP, which is not the thing we're going to use to get clean. That actually stands for Subjective Objective Assessment Plan. Those are the 4 major components of a patient documentation form. And finally, we have STOP-EATS, That's what the wife says every day. No, it's actually the top 8 things in order from most common to least that cause an altered mental status, or ALOR, as you might recall, altered level of responsiveness. That stands for sugars, temperature, oxygen, pressure, electricity, altitudes, toxins, and of course, salts. There we have our acronyms and mnemonics. Let's move on to our common medical shorthand. S/SX means signs and symptoms. Then we have TX, which stands for treatment. PT, which is not physical therapy. It in fact means patient in this instance. HR is not human resources, but instead has been repurposed to heart rate. BP, which is your blood pressure. Pearl, like Pearl Vision, easy way to remember that one, stands for pupils equal, round, and reactive to light. That is something vital signs related. And we have respiratory rate, and finally SCTM, or just SCTM, which stands for skin, color, temperature, moisture. These are all very easy way of writing down, instead of writing a whole entire big long thing, you can just write PT was exhibiting HR of 80. It's the same thing as writing it all out. Now, let's go back to that first one, signs and symptoms. Just to point out, there's a difference, right? Signs are things that you see. You see the person, they pull away, or like you see the cut, right? It's obvious things that are there. Versus symptoms, which are things that your patient tells you, or they exhibit to you, right? Verbal, body language, sign language, etc. Not just something like, "Ooh, I can see by looking at your face that you are experiencing pain." No, I'm fine, thanks. Right? Nope, you didn't have to know that. It's symptom. They tell you that's a symptom. Hopefully that's not too confusing. All right, last one here, and then we're done with this section. Woohoo! Basic terminology. There's a couple of things that really make the world go round, or by that I mean your body, right? We have perfusion. Sounds kind of cool. Blood flow to the tissue. Perfusion is very, very important. Ischemia, lack of said blood flow to tissue due to a blockage or something else bad. And of course, you can see that this is bright red, and then it's getting a little darker. And now, of course, the last one, infarction. That just sounds terrible. And it is. Infarction means tissue death due to ischemia. As we all know, ischemia, of course, being the lack of blood flowing to the tissue, and of course, perfusion being the wonderful flow that we want. Congratulations, you've made it past the very first lesson. Let's give you guys a quick review and see how much you remembered. As a reminder, you have 2 opportunities to take all of the quizzes. Hopefully you get them right on the first time, but if not, fret not. It is open book. We want you to know the information, and if you have any questions, comments, or concerns at any time, you can hit us up on our Facebook group. You can hit us up on WhatsApp. You can email us. You can send smoke signals. Whatever it takes, we'll help you out. Reach out.